If we haven't had a chance to meet, I am Justin. My wife, Jillian, and I, we are the pastors here at Connecting Point Church for worship and production teams. We're actually transplants to the area. We're originally both from the East Coast, but we've lived in Texas now for a couple years. And as always, I first of all just want to thank our lead pastors, Pastor Heidi and Pastor Jason DeVerna. I want to thank them for the leaders that they are, the work that they do here, just for their leadership in this church. And also want to thank them specifically for allowing me to be up here and speak to you guys this morning. They're actually out of town this weekend. They are taking their daughter Jaden to her first semester at college. So we are definitely keeping them in prayer this morning and this weekend as they're navigating that. We know that's a big emotional moment as she goes off. So we're praying for them this weekend. Last week, Pastor Jason was up here, and we ended our series called Talking Points. And Talking Points was a series about navigating the divisive political climate that we all know we're in right now, and working towards unity as a church, while also embracing, not just accepting, but embracing the individuality and the diversity of the people who make up that church. And last week specifically, Pastor Jason spoke about focusing on the things that we can control, putting our focus on that, and shifting our focus away from the things that we can't control. Because as much as we want to, as much as we might wish that we could, we can't control what happens politically, right? We can't control who candidates are. We can't control the circumstances around us. We can't control what's going on out there. But we talked about 4 things that we can control. Number 1 was we can control our filter. We can control what we allow ourselves to be inundated with versus unplugging from the politics and the news and plugging into God's word. Number 2, we said we can control our response. That when we act and we react, that we're doing it out of love and not out of anger or fear. We can control our thinking, that when unhelpful or unhealthy thoughts come in, that we shift our focus to the things of God. And like we read in Philippians 4:8, that we can think on things that are excellent and things that are worthy of praise instead. And then number 4, we talked about that we can control where we derive our security. And we read in Psalm 20, verse 7, that we're not going to put our hope or our trust in the strength of nations or any human construct, but that our trust and our faith is in God. And one of the ideas that Pastor Jason talked about and introduced us to last week was the idea that living a Christian life is not a passive lifestyle. That being a follower of Jesus is an active lifestyle, and it's something that we have to actively choose to do, to follow him on a regular basis. And so that's actually what we're going to talk about this morning in our new series, like we said that we're starting today, and that series is called Say Yes. And so I don't know about for you, when I see this, my very first question is, okay, say yes to what? Because for me, I don't say yes to anything, actually, before I have the details. And my poor wife can attest to this, because anytime she's like, hey, can you do me a favor? Can you help me out with anything? My response is, depends. What is the favor? Like, what are you asking me? I'm not going to say yes. I don't know if I can do it. What is it? So, is anybody else someone that like reads the fine print of anything? Like I am not signing my name on anything until I know exactly what it says in whatever that is. And I don't care, like they can tell me as many times as I want, like, oh, this is just standard. I'm like, cool. It'll just take me the standard amount of time to read through it then. Like, I don't care if we're in line, like if I need to sign it, people are just gonna have to wait until I can read through it and see what it says. Because I want to know what the details are. I want to know what I'm saying yes to before I say yes. So this morning, that's what we're going to talk about, is what is it that we're saying yes to, right? What is God calling us to? And specifically this morning, we're going to look at how God calls us to serve. So I'm going to start in prayer before we get into this. Lord, thank you that this morning we can come together, that we can read your word, God, hear what you have to say for us, God, that we can study and know what it is you're calling us to. God, I ask that you would just bless the words that you gave me to share this morning, use them to speak to our hearts, to just train us in your ways and help us to follow you better and closer. In Jesus' name, amen. So, I first just want to start out looking at, in the Bible, a few places where it mentions God calling us to serve and what that looks like. And the first one is 1 Peter 4:10. And it says this: each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. And then the next one is in Galatians chapter 5, verse 13. And it says, for you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. And then the next one is in Jesus' own words. And he says this, in Mark 10, verse 45, it says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So we see here in these scriptures, we see that Jesus modeled a life of serving others. And then in the first two, we also just see it laid out in clear terms, right? In 1 Peter, it says, you should use your gifts to serve. Simple. In Galatians, it says, don't use your freedom to self-satisfy, use it to serve others. So serving others, it's what Jesus modeled for us. It's what God calls us to. But it's also just God's expectation of us. And a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of being up here and talking to you guys, and we spoke about grace. And several times on that Sunday, we looked at a verse, or a couple of verses, in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, where it says this: for by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. So we have that passage, but then there's also a passage in James where it says this, in James 2:17. In the same way, faith also, if it has no works, is dead, being by itself. And at first, a lot of times, I think it's really easy for us to just be like, well, those two verses are kind of contradicting each other. And they seem kind of like they're at odds, but one says it is faith, it's not works. And the other says that faith, if it's not with works, is useless. But really, it's just instructions. And they're instructions that have to be followed in a specific order. Has anyone ever built IKEA furniture before? Yeah. I'll be honest with you, I have not. Anytime that jobs come into our home that require tools or building things, I'm out. That's my wife's going to handle that. She enjoys doing that thing. I don't like that. I will say, back in the day, I did enjoy doing Legos and putting those together, right? But either way, with those type of tasks, you have instructions. And you have to follow them in a specific order. And if you don't, it's not going to turn out the way that it was intended. And really simple, if we look here at this table, it comes in 3 parts. We have the base, the leg, and the tabletop. And I could go out of order putting this together. I could even just go straight for the tabletop and use it by itself. As a, what were those things called? Lap desk or whatever. They were really popular a couple years ago when we were all working remotely from home. But that's not how this table is designed. It's probably not going to be super comfortable for that purpose. It's not how it's intended. If I want to put it together the way that it's intended, I have to go step 1, attach the leg to the base. And then step 2, I can put the tabletop on. And then in that order, following those directions, it's going to function how it's intended, the way that I'm using it right now. And it's the same way with God's calling for us. Step 1 is that we choose to accept God's grace through faith. And then we come into a relationship with God. But then step 2 is that out of that relationship, a heart for serving others is birthed. And so that's why James says faith, if it's without works, is dead. Because if that heart to serve others isn't being birthed yet, if it's not growing out of that relationship, then the reality is that that faith and that relationship is actually not functioning on a healthy level yet. And it's not functioning the way that it was intended. So let's look at why that is. Jesus talks about serving others this way. We're going to read in Matthew chapter 25, verses 34 through 40. So again, this is Jesus speaking, and he says this: "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me.' Then these righteous ones will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth. When you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me.'" You see, a heart for serving others is birthed out of relationship with God, because serving others, that's actually our purpose in God. And at Connecting Point Church, we say it all the time. We are all about connecting to God, to people, and to purpose. But here's a little spoiler alert. Those things, they're all actually connected already. Because our purpose is in serving others, people. And living that out is part of connecting and being in relationship to God. And we see here in that scripture, Jesus even said, serving others is actually how we serve God. It's an act of worship. Because what we have to remember about worship is that worship is not music. What we do here on Sunday mornings with music together, that is an act of worship. That is a form of living out our worship, but that's not what worship is in and of itself. Worship is actually a sacrifice. Sacrificing our own desires to work towards something better. Like we read in Galatians 5:13. It says, "For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters. But don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love." So we're called to sacrifice that, the things that we want to do, as an act of worship, a sacrifice to God. And the thing that we have to remember about sacrifice is that sacrifice has to cost us something. And in the Old Testament, it's easy to see, because in the Old Testament, people had to make a physical sacrifice, an animal sacrifice of some kind. And I think that's great symbolism of what we can actually learn about what it means to really sacrifice. And there's a great example where God calls David to make a sacrifice, and Pastor Heidi and Pastor Jason actually spoke about this a couple weeks ago. But it's in 1 Chronicles, we're starting at chapter 21, verses 18 and 19. And it says this: "Then the angel of the Lord told Gad to instruct David to go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David went up to do what the Lord had commanded him through Gad." So we see here in this scripture, first of all, God tells David to do something, right? Go make a sacrifice. He told him to do it in a specific way, at a specific place. And then David's answer, simple, yes. He goes up to do it, right? So then as we go further in the story, what we're going to see is that Araunah, the person who owns the land, he actually offers David the land and everything that he needed to make the sacrifice for free. He just wants to give it to David. But this is the thing that David says, and this is what we can learn about sacrifice from David and from this story. So if we look at chapter 21, verse 24 now, it says, "But King David replied to Araunah, 'No. I insist on paying the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, or sacrifice a burnt offering that costs me nothing.'" Because again, sacrifice requires a cost. It's not an optional thing with sacrifice. It's a requirement. And the thing is, if we're only giving to God when it's convenient for us to do so, that's not a sacrifice. And that's not what God expects of us. So That means if we're only showing up to church on the days that it's convenient and easy to get here, or if we're only paying our tithes if there's leftover at the end of the month instead of giving it to God at the beginning when it comes in, if we're only serving in a capacity to serve others when it's convenient or when it's easy, or if I'm only serving when I get something out of it, or if I'm only serving when I'm there to get recognition for it, or if I'm only stepping into a leadership position so that I can feel like I'm in charge of somebody, guess what? Not sacrifice either. And we've read about what Jesus said. He talked about feeding the hungry. He talked about spending time with people. He talked about clothing the poor. And all of those things, they have a cost with them. A cost in time, in money, in resource, and a cost for the benefit of others, and not for our own selfish desire. And here's the thing, like we said, serving others and making that sacrifice, that's the expectation. And that is the process for a healthy walk with God. And that means that just logically, the opposite is also true. That means that not serving and not walking in sacrifice is an unhealthy lifestyle. And again, the reality is, it's not just unhealthy. We actually cannot be in relationship with God if we're not serving others. Those two things, they can't coexist. And if you don't believe me, let's look at what Jesus said. Again, back to our verse in our scripture in Matthew. If we go down to verse 41, he says this: "Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, 'Away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me.' Then they will reply, 'Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?' And he will answer, 'I tell you the truth. When you refuse to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are refusing to help me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life.'" Jesus says it right here, pretty clearly. The result of not serving others out of a relationship with God is eternal punishment. That means being cut off from God's presence forever. And so that is why James says faith without works, dead. Because if we aren't seeing the blossoming and the growing of a heart and a desire to serve, growing out of our faith and relationship with Jesus, then really we're just kidding ourselves. That is not faith. Faith is believing in God's word. And that starts with the promise of salvation through his grace. And that's step one. That's building the foundation. But here's the thing. If we stop at step one, then that faith is useless. It doesn't serve a purpose. It's a foundation for nothing. And Jesus himself said here that God's response will be away with you. Because you can't be in relationship with God without serving people. That's step two. And it's not even step 3 or 4 or like 10 down the road. It's the second step. So if we're truly going to follow Jesus, it requires that serving component. And look, this isn't meant to condemn any of us. And it's also not about being forced to serve. It's about growing a heart that loves to serve others. But we also have to understand how vital serving others is to our walk with Jesus. And we also have to acknowledge that it's hard to grow a love for something that you don't experience. Like, I think probably the second thing that Matt was referencing this morning, and I didn't set him up for that, he just like kind of threw me that softball, is if you spend more than 10 minutes talking to me, you're going to find out that I am obsessed with coffee. And like, not just like like I don't drink lattes. Like if you've put something in your coffee, you've done something wrong. Okay, like I'm a purist. And also, if you're like, yeah, I drink that dark bitter stuff. Nope, you did it wrong too. Like I have very strict goals on what I want to get out of my coffee at the end of the day. I have a long process of, like, I get up in the morning, I have like 6 or 7 different grinders depending on what I'm doing with my coffee. Like, it is an obsession. But it's hard. It would be hard for me to grow a love for coffee if I had never had coffee before. Same thing. It's hard to grow a love for anything that you don't experience. And there's also a difference, right? Because it's the same way in our relationship with Jesus and serving. There's a difference between following Jesus and what he called us to and just acknowledging Jesus. And when Jesus was on trial to be crucified, actually, even the Roman governor Pilate, he acknowledged Jesus. We see it in John chapter 18, verses 37 through 39. It says, Pilate said, "So you are a king?" And Jesus responded, "You say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. Then he went out again to the people and told them, "He is not guilty of any crime, but you have a custom of asking me to release one prisoner each year at Passovers. Would you like me to release this king of the Jews?" And if we go further down the story in chapter 19, verses 19 and then 21 through 22, it says this, "And Pilate posted a sign on the cross that read, 'Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.' Then the leading priests objected and said to Pilate, 'Change it from the King of the Jews to, he said, I am King of the Jews.' And Pilate replied, 'No, what I have written, I have written.'" So we see here, even Pilate, he came to the realization of who Jesus was. The man who sentenced Jesus to be crucified. He saw the truth. He accepted it, but he didn't follow. And if we think about like going to the doctor, you guys know I love that like doctor metaphor, right? The doctor can actually tell you, hey, you need to cut sugar out of your diet, right? Or you need to quit smoking, you need to exercise, you need to quit that like sedentary lifestyle. You need to cut that thing out or it's going to kill you. And you can hear that from the doctor, and you can believe it, you can understand it, you can accept it, you can acknowledge it, you can even go around and tell other people about it. But what do you think is going to happen if you don't do it and follow what the doctor says? It's a do or die situation, literally. And it's the same way when we're trying to follow after Jesus. And we take that first step of faith toward him. And it's such a beautiful thing because we take that one step and Jesus just comes running back to us. But then if we refuse to take that second step, to live out that life of serving others the way that he modeled for us to live life, I mean, what would we expect to happen in our walk with Jesus? And again, it's just like the doctor. Because that doctor can remind you every single time you see him, hey, you got to cut that out. You got to quit it. But they can't take that step for you. And God even gave us free will. So even after we take that first step of faith toward God, we still have that free will and that freedom. And it's still our choice where that second step lands. And we can take that second step of following after Jesus and after his principles and what he called us to do. Or we can also just turn around and go the opposite direction. Because like we talked about last week, this following Jesus thing, it's an active lifestyle. And so we have the ability to choose what direction we're going and whether we're going to follow and whether we're growing or not. And I want to talk about freedom some more. And I want to take a look one more time at that verse in Galatians. Because here's the cool thing. It says, "For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters. But don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love. So we have free will. We get to choose what we do with it. But God says, use it this way. Serve others. Don't be doing something just for yourself and your sinful nature. And our sacrifice, it's not about getting something for ourselves. But our God is such a gracious God. So even though that's what he expects the sacrifice from us, he still honors that sacrifice, and he honors it every single time. And we see it in that story that we were talking about earlier with David's sacrifice. So if we go a little further down in 1 Chronicles chapter 21 and verse 26, it says, David built an altar to the Lord, what he had been told to do. He built an altar to the Lord there and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He called on the Lord, and the Lord answered him with fire from heaven on the altar of burnt offering. Like, that's pretty cool already. Like, fire just comes out of the sky and like, that's pretty awesome. But fire in the Old Testament is actually a representation of God's presence. And we see it here. We see it in a similar story in Genesis where Abel brings his sacrifice and God answers with fire from heaven as well. We see it with Moses in the burning bush as God talks to him out of the fire in the bush. We see it with the children of Israel, the cloud of fire at night that leads them. So what is the significance then of a sacrifice and then God's presence? Well, it's that simple. When we follow God's principles, we come closer to him. And I mean, just even logically, in natural everyday things, when we walk towards something, we get closer to it. And so when we're following God's principles, we're growing in relationship with him. And just like Matt talked about, we had our panel of speakers last month, and they told their stories of freedom. And unprompted, all three of them told about how in some way, when they started serving, things in their life, they just started to come to a healthier place. And the reality is, that doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen. They are. But it is that simple. When we as followers of Jesus, get this, follow Jesus, when we live according to his principles and the example that he modeled for us, he blesses that. And the things in our life, they just start to come in line and they become healthier. And then we tend to be serving alongside people that are trying to do that same thing of following after Jesus. So then our relationships become healthier. And all it takes, just saying yes. Saying yes to God, saying yes to his serving, and saying yes to serving him by serving others. And at Connecting Point Church, like, what we want to do is be a resource for you on that journey. And if you haven't found a place to serve here yet, we want to help you with that. That's why we do a thing called Next Steps after service every Sunday to get you plugged in to be part of serving our community here. And in fact, this is actually week 2 of Next Steps. And in week 2, you find out what your individual gifts are, how God has designed you and called you specifically to serve others and to be able to live out your purpose. And we would love to have you join us in Next Steps. If you've never done it before, it's a 4-week program. You can jump in any week. You can jump in this week if you want. But regardless, this morning I want to encourage all of us in this. And that is that God saved us out of his love. And he expects us to serve others as an expression of that love through us. So this morning, let's just start saying yes. And let's find where we can live that love out. And right now for you, maybe it is joining a team here at church. Maybe that's the kids team. Matt and Haley were up here earlier. They talked about how you can jump in and be a part of serving on the kids team. Maybe that's the worship and production team. Maybe you want to serve up here with us or back there with us. Maybe it's the host team welcoming people in on a Sunday morning. Maybe it's with CP Cares, our community impact team, or our youth, our young adults teams. But we have a spot for you. And just talk to us, because we want to help you find that spot where you can serve others. Maybe you're already serving on a team, and maybe the step right now is saying yes to stepping into a leadership role that you've been called into on that team. Or maybe right now, all it is just seeing a need and saying, you know what, I know how to help with that thing. And then maybe for you this morning, saying yes right now is just at the point of saying yes to starting a walk in a relationship with Jesus. Because maybe you haven't made that first step yet of accepting God's love and accepting the sacrifice that he made for us first. So maybe right now it's just time to say yes to that first step of starting that walk with Jesus and to see a better way that he prepared for each of us individually. So right now, I'm just gonna ask all of us to close our eyes and bow our heads. And if that is you this morning, and you're saying, you know what, I haven't said yes to that relationship with Jesus yet, but I wanna start on that journey this morning. I'm not gonna call you out, I'm not gonna embarrass you. Nobody else is even looking around. But in a second, I am gonna ask you to just raise your hand high enough and long enough so that I can see it. I just wanna be able to pray with you this morning. So if that's you, and you say, yeah, I am ready to say yes to a life with Jesus, just raise your hand right now. Raise it where we can see it. You say, yeah, I know Jesus is calling me out of what I have been in. I know he's calling me out of my mistakes and what I have done, and he's calling me into something better and something greater for him. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that hand. Yeah. There's no better time, there's no better decision to make. All right, this is what we're gonna do now. I'm gonna ask you to pray this prayer after me, and I'm gonna ask everyone in here to pray this prayer out loud so that nobody feels singled out, nobody feels embarrassed. But if you raise your hand this morning and you say, I'm ready to take that first step, just pray it from your heart and know that God hears this when you pray. So pray after me. Dear Lord, thank you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you that you see me for who I am and you love me for who I am. God, this morning, I accept your sacrifice. I accept your love, and I'm taking that first step to walk in relationship with you and be a new person as of right now. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, let's celebrate with those people that made that decision. There is no better decision that you will ever have the opportunity to make.